Welcome back to Our Canada, Our Future. We're talking about the government's new Indo-Pacific Strategy with Carlo Dade of the Canada West Foundation. Carlo, we were talking about how China loomed large to the strategy, but I wanted to get your view on the release of the strategy. I mean, this was a very highly anticipated strategy, years in the making, and it was released on a Sunday during Canada's World Cup game. Do you read anything into the decision to release it at that very unusual time?
I don't know what to make of that, other than the fact that I missed the Canada game because I was online and doing other things suddenly. It threw myself and I think other analysts um, and those you would expect to respond immediately. It threw most of us in this point where we had to scramble and we couldn't respond right away. It was bizarre. You do that if you want to kill a story, but this strategy has been delayed. Anticipation, is put it mildly. It's bizarre. But it can't go unremarked that the government did this. I mean, this cannot be a precedent going forward. So I don't know what to make of it, but you're certainly right to mention it. And the government needs to be called out for this and called to explain the reasoning behind this.
Yeah. Okay. We've talked about it with China. I wanted to talk about one of the other big players, of course, in the region, which is India. In a lot of cases, India is sort of characterized as a counterweight to China, as an alternative to China, a country that Canada needs to build relationships, more stronger relationships with. So I wanted to get your view on what the strategy says about the approach to India and how it compares to what the strategy says about China, and whether you think Canada, what the strategy says about India is also appropriate.
So I won't go into the details, but the larger point here is this. What applies to China applies to India. There are statements in the strategy and in the public discussions that Canada needs to deal with China with its eyes wide open. It implies that we have not been dealing with China with our eyes wide open, that we went into the relationship with China not knowing which we were getting into. The same thing applies to India. I see the same mistakes being repeated. Again, the mistake isn't that the Indian market is important, that we should engage. It's a question of how we do this. We do not have the basic level of information, the ability to get intelligence in the wider business community and in the public policy community to have good policy towards China. Yet now we're rushing into India the same way we rushed into China without having the basics to allow good policy making on the relationship. So while the target is correct, we haven't corrected the fundamental flaw in Canada. We are digging ourselves out of a knowledge hole on China that is a crater. And yet we're about to go into India with an even deeper deficit in terms of being able to manage the relationship. The document got it right in the need to increase China capacity, all the money to increase engagement. That's a good start, but caution. If we went into India with our eyes shut or our eyes not wide open, then what are we doing with India? I would say we're doing the same thing, and there's a need for caution. Not to stop, but at least to learn the lesson of the hole we're just climbing out of before climbing into another hole.
That's interesting. And so, in your view, it's less about the specific characteristics of China? It's obviously not a democracy, very opaque, a lot of linkages between supposedly private business and the state in China, versus India, which is a democracy, and arguably doesn't have that same kind of business government linkages, but nonetheless, you think that Canada needs to take a very wide-eyed open approach to dealing with India?
Certainly. 2017, the imposition of tariffs on Canadian peas. We seem to have forgotten about that. It was arguably, I would say, as bad, if not worse, than canola. India ranks 100 and I think 1920 on the Human Freedom Index, put out, I think it's by Cato or the Heritage Foundation. That's 30, 25, 30 points higher than China, but it's still way down there on the list. So the issues in India are different, but they're complex. And we can't go in with this naive thought that, oh, it's a friendly democracy. 119, 120 on the Human Freedom Index list. There are issues there. And sorry,
I
India got
guess
kicked out
having your
of
eyes wide
the
open.
regional. Also, India got kicked out of the Regional Economic Partnership, the Chinese-led version of the TPP.